In this lesson, we'll discuss restricting applications. Now, let me take a moment here and ask you a question. How many applications do you have installed on your computer right now? Now, I don't mean how many are you currently running, like your web browser or your email client, but exactly how many exist on your computer in total. Do you have 5, 50, 500, or maybe even more? Each application that's installed on your device will take up valuable disk space, but more importantly, it's going to introduce additional code and therefore additional vulnerabilities to your system. To combat this, system administrators will attempt to practice a concept known as least functionality. Least functionality is the process of configuring a workstation or a server to provide only essential applications and services that are going to be required by that user. To create an environment of least functionality, your administrators need to restrict unneeded applications, services, ports, and protocols on that system. Now, another method of doing this is to start uninstalling any unneeded applications. After all, every application that's installed on a computer has to be managed, updated, and patched for security, and it provides yet another chance for a vulnerability to be introduced into our systems. Now, at work, most of our computers are going to be placed under a process known as configuration management to help us oversee this process. But for our personal computers at home, they become a mess with unnecessary programs being installed and accumulated over time. For example, if you go into your program area of Windows, you can open it up and see all the different programs that you have installed. You might be surprised at just how many there are on your computer. For this example, I have a computer here with 132 different programs installed that took over 400 gigabytes of disk space. Now, looking through this list, there's a lot of unnecessary programs that user could have uninstalled. As I previously mentioned, it's really important to keep all your programs and your software up to date. And sometimes, though, these new programs will also be installed and leave the old version intact. Now, for example, I used to use a software called Adobe Premiere as a video editing software. And every year they put out a new version, like Adobe Premiere 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on. And if I went from 2018 to 2019 or 2019 to 2020, after the installation was complete, we saw that both versions, the old one and the new one, were both still installed on the computer. So, to eliminate the vulnerabilities with the older version, we had to go back and manually uninstall it from our systems. Now, this may be very easy to do if you have a small network of just a few machines. But how do you do this when you're managing a huge enterprise network? For example, one network I used to manage had over 10,000 computers spread across 4 countries. It would have been nearly impossible for me to send my system administrators out to each of those computers and check which ones had the programs installed and which ones didn't. In large networks like this, preventing excessive installations is going to be your best solution. In most of our corporate networks, it's going to be common for us to create a secure baseline image that we're going to use for all the workstations that are getting installed in our company from when they're first installed at your desk. Now, this image will have the operating system, the minimum applications required for that organization, and a strict configuration policy that's all set up for all of those machines. Now, these policies will have to be updated and changed over time based on our changing business requirements, and to do that, we're going to be pushing out group policies and other things across our organization using those. So now that we've discussed why we should be using a secure baseline with the minimum level of functionality for our systems, we have to figure out how are we going to stop Gary down in accounting from downloading and installing his own piece of software on our organization's computers. To do this, what we want to do is restrict which applications can be run on a given workstation. Now, let me give you an example of this. Let's say you and I wanted to go to a trendy nightclub this Friday night. We show up at the door and we're greeted by the bouncer. Now, the bouncer looks at us and he asks if we're on the list. So I give him my name and I say, "Hey, I'm Jason Dion." And he looks at the list and realizes I'm not on his list because I'm not that trendy. Now, this means he's not going to let me get into that club. Now, maybe you're cooler than I am and your name was on the list. And if that's the case, they're going to let you into the club. Now, if each of us was considered to be an application on a computer, this nightclub example shows you what we're talking about when we talk about a concept known as allow listing. Based on allow listing, I'm going to be denied because my name isn't on the list. With application allow listing, only applications that are on the approved list are going to be allowed to be run on that operating system. And all the other applications will get blocked from running. This is the most secure way of doing this, and this is what we want to do to prevent Gary down in accounting from installing things on our systems. Now, if you think back to your Network Plus studies, you're probably familiar with the concept of an access control list. And this is essentially an explicit allow statement in an access control list, but at an application level instead of at a network level. Now, for my next example, let's say that my friend and I are going to head to the airport. We arrive at the airport and we walk up to the ticket counter and we try to check in with the agent at the counter, so we hand her our passports and she looks at our names. After consulting her computer, she sees that my friend is apparently a bad guy because he's on the no-fly list. Now, because his name's on that list, he is denied the ability to check in and he's not able to take the flight. Now, my name, on the other hand, is not on that list, and therefore I'm allowed to go and board the airplane. This is an example of how blocklisting works. With application blocklisting, any application that's placed on the list is going to be prevented from running, while all other applications will be permitted to run. This is considered to be a less secure method than using allow listing though, because if you're an application whose name shows up on the block list, you're going to be denied, but anything else will be allowed to proceed. Now, you may be wondering, why do we have these two different types of lists? Well, using application allow listing is much more secure, as I said, because everything is denied by default and only the things we specifically list are going to be allowed to run. Unfortunately though, this is much more difficult to set up and manage because every time an application is updated, you're going to have to update your allow list too. After all, Microsoft Word 2016 is not the exact same code as version 2 or version 3 or the current version of Office 365. For this reason, many companies have chosen to use block list approaches instead. But there's a problem with this approach too, because everything is allowed except what you explicitly deny in that list. And so every new variation of malware or a new program that comes out is going to be allowed until you create a block list rule for it. This becomes a big challenge when you're dealing with allow listing and block listing because you have to manage that list across all the workstations in your network. Thankfully though, if you're using a Microsoft Windows domain environment, you can use your Microsoft Active Directory domain controller to be able to centrally manage all your lists and deploy them through your group policies. So remember, when it comes to restricting applications, you can do this one of two ways. You can use an allow list or a block list. If you use an allow list, everything is going to be blocked except what is on the list. If you use a block list, on the other hand, everything will be allowed except what's on that list. This is the way you have to think about these things, and which one you're going to use is going to depend on how secure you want your organization to be. For higher levels of security, you should use an allow list, but at a minimum, you should be using a block list to block any applications you know are malicious or to block any applications that you don't want running on your network.